Hi, kids. It's scientist and children's book author Ruthy Ballard again with another video in my series titled An Author's Life, Inspiration and Research. In the first video in the series, I focused on inspiration and told you how I came up with the idea for the East End Paddling Station, an underwater hotel on distant planet Earth, where all the rooms have different themes and the decorations in each are wild and over the top. In this video, I'm going to switch lanes and talk about research. In particular, I want to share with you how I prepped to write Elvia and the Gift of Passion, where the protagonist, Elvia Hill, takes a week-long voyage on the Earth aboard a glamorous cruising submarine called the Sunken Treasure. I began writing Elvia's adventure before I toured a submarine. I'd never been aboard one, but as I got into the story deeper and deeper, I realized that I wanted to find out more. I got so interested in the topic that I watched every submarine movie I could find. And I also traveled to Portland, Oregon, where the USS Blueback was in dock, so I could take a tour. The guide told us all sorts of things about that submarine life that I found fascinating. Submarines are very cramped for one thing, and that's because here on Earth, they're not meant for pleasure trips. They're military vessels that are all business and need to have a small footprint to avoid detection. Yet all the food the crew will need must be loaded aboard before the sub sets off, and that means that the sailors often crawled rather than walked through the subs, at least at first. The food was stacked on the floor in the narrow passageways, and there was no room to stand upright. Later on, as they consumed the food, the sailors had more room. I also learned that submarines are pretty hot and uncomfortable inside when they're in service. And sometimes the sailors would go sleep in the torpedo room to stay cool. I'm not sure I'd want to sleep among a bunch of armed torpedoes, but I guess if you're desperate, you'll do just about anything. Another fun fact about submarine life is that sailors were fed really, really well, and food was available to them 24/7. Lots of yummy ice cream and other goodies to keep them happy. Great food was one of the lures for volunteering for a sub-assignment, and I guess it was enough to put up with some heat and cramped living space, at least for some. When you read Elvia and the Gift of Passion, you'll find that the Sunken Treasure bears little resemblance to the USS Blueback, at least in the expansive guest quarters. The Lunera room, where Elvia and her spirit guide Lacey stayed during their voyage, is huge. Here's Elvia's reaction when she enters the room for the first time. Elvia's high hopes for the Lunera room were borne out. The glamorous cabin sat at the very front of the submarine and on the highly prized bottom deck. 6 crystal chandeliers glimmered overhead, studded with thousands of tiny lights. Floor-to-ceiling mirrors embraced the room on 3 sides, rimmed in gold. Someone, could it be the captain, had festooned the room with flowers and bon voyage greetings written in a fine hand. A huge bed, perfectly round and heaped with an abundance of elegant, ruffled pillows, stood in center. But the predominant feature of the impressive cabin, the one that drew her eyes like a magnet, was the curved, transparent wall of thick glass that followed the external hull of the boat and offered a spectacular view of the reef beyond. "It's like being in the cockpit of an airplane," Elvia cried, racing over to press her nose against the massive porthole. "We'll be able to see everything." Lacey was delighted too. "Yes, but instead of flying through sky, we'll be sailing through explorer blue ocean and green seen kelp forests. I do believe Azure will have a heart attack if he knew we'd scored this room. We'll be on the leading edge of the bottom deck where all the submarine travelers long to be. Ha! I've taken many voyages to Amdo, but I've never cruised in such grand style." The crew's quarters are much more modest and modeled after what I saw on the Blueback. Elvia makes friends with a boy with the unlikely name of Rats, the captain's son, in fact, and he's an apprentice sailor. His quarters are tiny, a lot like the captain's room on the Blueback shown here. One final fun fact about submarine life is that when you're sailing under the waves, you're unmoored from the daily march of the sun in a 24-hour day. On some subs, the day length was shortened to 18 hours, and the crew worked 6, rested and recreated for 6, and then slept for 6. Then it would start again. It was apparently a much more efficient use of their time, and most sailors adapted to the change without a problem.